So good morning and welcome to this very short course on getting honest about attachment. I say short course because the more I worked on putting it together, the more I realized, oh my gosh, this is a huge topic. I hadn't seen it quite so clearly before. So this morning, let's start with the abbreviated recitations. Well, actually, no, we're going to start with refuge and 4 immeasurables and then maybe some mantras. And then we'll take a few minutes just to do some breathing meditation. And then I'll set a motivation for our session this morning. And we'll go from there. So again, welcome. I'm adding my welcome to Venerable Children's beautiful welcome last night. Glad you're here this weekend.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. 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 Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha.
So if you're new to breathing meditation, just make sure that you're sitting up straight, your back is straight, your feet flat on the floor if you're in a chair, and you can just place your right hand on your left hand in your lap if that's comfortable. And just take a nice deep breath and relax your shoulders. Just pull them down to their natural place. Soften your shoulders and see if you can soften your belly. We hold a lot of tension in our belly. And also see if you can relax all the little muscles in your face, around the eyes, the forehead, your jaw, around the mouth. And just very gently bring your attention to notice either the rise and fall of the abdomen with each in-breath, each out-breath, Just let your breath be very natural. We're not trying to control it in any way, just noticing the natural in-breath and the sensations, and the natural out-breath and the different sensations stimulated. So then to set our motivation, let's just reflect how all day long, every day, without a break, even when we're dreaming and sleeping, we're contacting different objects, mental objects or tangible objects, sight, sound, smells, tastes, etc. And we're contacting them through our senses and through our mind, through conceptualization. And doesn't it seem to you as if some of those objects contain happiness? As if they're the cause of our happiness. And so we want those kinds of things, those experiences. While other things appear to be suffering in themselves or the cause of our suffering, dissatisfaction. And so we turn away from those. And so just notice how it appears as if external things and people and experiences make us happy or unhappy, as if they contain that happiness or dissatisfaction or suffering in and of themselves. And then because of this assumption, we spend all our time trying to associate with the right people, get the right things, try the right kinds of experiences, which we think will bring us happiness, lasting, reliable, stable happiness. And we also try to avoid the things that cause dissatisfaction. Fair enough, there's nothing wrong with this. But have we ever tested that original assumption? Do the causes of happiness and suffering exist external to our own mind, our own interpretation, our own labeling? Do they exist the way they appear to our mind? That's an important question. Hopefully, one of the things we'll discover this weekend is that all afflictions, including attachment, are based on that innate assumption that happiness comes from outside of ourselves. And so this is one of the things we'll be investigating this weekend, the role of attachment in our lives, in all aspects of our lives. And so just think about what motivated you to come here this weekend and learn a little bit more about attachment. What's your own personal motivation for being here? Since questioning assumptions like this are universal questions that apply to all living beings, then see if you can expand your motivation to include that we're engaging in this exploration not just for our own happiness, our own information and development, because we know the more we understand about our own mind, the more we naturally understand about every other living being, because we're kind of hardwired the same way. And so let's imagine engaging in this exploration so that we can be of greater and greater benefit to our dear ones, our family and our friends, modeling for them how to overcome suffering and how to find real happiness, peace, satisfaction. And we can also engage on behalf of strangers, the countless living beings that we rely on every day to provide our basic needs, the people growing our food and building our shelters, providing clothing, etc. Everything we use, we depend on others to bring those about. So let's do it for them too. And we can even aspire, or we can see if we can aspire to do this for people we find difficult, challenging, downright ornery, wishing for them also to discover the true causes of happiness and suffering so that they can be more fulfilled, more satisfied. So see if you can make your motivation very, very expansive like that, including every living being, humans, non-humans, animals. All living beings have a longing for happiness and freedom from suffering. So let's be here this weekend really working on our own minds so that we can cultivate more of our qualities, more of our potential, and really be of greater benefit to all beings. So I want to applaud all of you for taking the time to come here this weekend. It takes a lot of courage to look into your mind very honestly. and see where we might be wrong, what a concept we might be wrong. Just because we think something doesn't mean it's right. It just means that's our habitual way of thinking. So we're going to be investigating some of our thoughts. Had I understood just how insidious and pervasive attachment is, I might have chosen another topic. It's been quite an eye-opener to prepare for this weekend. Yeah, really surprising just how, I mean, every aspect of our life is pervaded by attachment. See what you discover. This is what I've discovered putting this together. But we're in good company. I read a story by Joseph Goldstein. Some of you may know him. He's a Theravadan teacher. And he tells the story that there was one time several years ago, many years ago, when the Dalai Lama was giving teachings in LA. It was a series of teachings. And so every morning they would drive him from his hotel to the venue, and then at night they'd drive him back. And they drove down this road that had a lot of fancy shops that had a lot of electronic gadgets. And so the story goes that His Holiness would look at the windows with curiosity, you know, just interest, just initially just some interest. And then as the week went by, he found himself being drawn into thinking, it'd be nice to have one of those things. I wonder what they are. Now, I'm not sure that's a true story. I'm sure His Holiness did not have attachment, but this gives us an idea of how insidious this natural inclination to be interested, and then as soon as we give interest to something, notice how we start thinking, oh, that might benefit me. Maybe I should have one of those. So we're in good company. This weekend is by no means exhaustive. That goes without saying. But it's more like an introduction, or maybe an extension of an introduction we've already started. And here this weekend, we have a mixture of people who are completely new to Buddhism, and we also have people who have been around for many years and been studying, working with this topic for a long time. So we have a real mixture, and hopefully that'll bring out a real richness this weekend. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the mind, because it's the mind that gets attached. And so we need to understand something about the mind. It sure seems as if happiness exists out there, you know, from its own side, especially in the people and objects we're attached to, right? That's how it appears. That's what attachment is doing to our mind. It's putting up an image, a projection, and then we assent to that projection. And so that's why we become attached, and we don't want to be separated from these objects or these people or these ideas even. I mean, everything. I think every noble object, we could have attachment for it. Well, except maybe there are some exceptions. We'll talk about those later. But think about it. Our happiness and suffering are impermanent experiences. They come and they go, right? We're not always happy, unfortunately. And luckily, we're not always suffering, or at least, you know, not manifest suffering. And so like all impermanent phenomena, happiness and suffering have causes. That's just basic science, isn't it? And they have compatible causes, not incompatible or incongruent causes. So, you know, with happiness, for example, we could say that we could divide this many different ways, but we could say that there are external causes or conditions for happiness, and there are also maybe internal causes for this experience of happiness. And so we know a lot about the external causes because we're chasing them all day long. Nice sights, nice smells, nice taste, delicious food, enjoyable times with our friends and our family, vacations, everything, right? We're attached to everything. These things seem to contain happiness, and so we want to spend time with those objects. And so having these things does bring about a kind of pleasure, for sure. There are many levels of pleasure and happiness. So it does, since objects do bring about a type of pleasure, but we have to look at what kind of pleasure that is. What is it really bringing to us? Is it a reliable kind of happiness? Is it stable? Is it lasting? Or is it more fleeting and unreliable? Is it predictable? Is it short-lived? So these are the things we need to investigate, and then to question, are there more long-lasting, reliable kinds of happiness? So if we ask, if we check, if we think about the things that do bring us happiness, we can ask, can any of these things guarantee our happiness? There are a lot of rich people out there who are not happy. Can any of these things guarantee happiness? No. And are they even necessary? Are they required for us to experience happiness? I think, again, we could say no. We can think of examples of people who have very little and have quite content lives. Lama Zopa Rinpoche tells the story of people who have come to Kathmandu over the years to spend time at Kopan. The people in the Kathmandu Valley, they're, in general, they're kind of content. Of course, now that there's internet and they know there's other things they can have, there's probably more discontent. But initially, they were quite content with their simple lives. Whereas people who came to Kopan from the West, a lot of them left right away because they could not stand the uncomfortable conditions. They were not content with what was there. So these things are not actually necessary or required. Of course, we do need food, shelter, clothing for our survival. But do we need the food that we're attached to be happy? Do we need the clothing that we're attached to really find happiness and contentment? That's what we're going to be looking at. So there are these external conditions. I think it's more appropriate to call them conditions for our happiness. And fair enough, we do want to be happy. Someone asked His Holiness, what's the meaning of life? And he said, I don't know. And then they asked him, well, what's the purpose of life? And he said, oh, the purpose is to be happy. Because the ultimate happiness from a Buddhist point of view, as Venerable was mentioning last night, is Buddhahood, full awakening, omniscient mind, where all the causes of suffering have been eliminated and all the causes for lasting peace and the bliss she was talking about are stable, they're reliable, they're never ending. So then we look at internal causes and we really ask, well, is it possible to develop a lasting kind of happiness and well-being independent of the usual external factors that we find ourselves chasing after all the time? Is it possible to find reliable, stable happiness that doesn't disappear after a while or doesn't turn into something we don't want? So is it possible to find a kind of happiness that is there regardless of what's happening externally? And I'll bet some of you have had that experience where you've had little tastes where maybe you had all the right conditions in your life, everything was going well, but your mind was upset. And so even though those perfect conditions were there, it wasn't so good, was it? Because our mind was upset. But we've probably also had the opposite experience, which is we've had times where something was very challenging. And if our mind was in a good place, we could handle it, we could deal with it without being upset, without getting all freaked out. So that's a clue that our mind is actually the most important ingredient. So karma, the law of cause and effect, is a big part of the Buddhist worldview that Venerable was describing last night. And we could say it boils down to happiness is a product of a mind filled with positive, virtuous states of mind. Like loving kindness, compassion, generosity, patience, ethics, things like this. And stands to reason when the mind is positive, our actions are more positive, aren't they? You see that in your own life experience. And then the results are more positive. We can see some of the results now. There are also results we can't see. That's the difficult part of karma, is that we can't connect all the dots because we can't see karmic seeds that are being placed on our mind stream that will ripen later when all the conditions come together. And just to be clear here, and maybe this is clear from all the studies that have been done, the research that has been done in the last 25 years or so, that when we're talking about the mind, we're not talking about the brain. We're talking about something non-material. Gross minds may depend on the brain and the nervous system and different sense organs, but they're not any of those tangible physical things. The mind is non-material. And conversely, unhappiness or suffering or dissatisfaction, what we call dukkha, it's probably more encompassing to use that word dukkha, all the different variations of unhappiness and unsatisfaction, dissatisfaction. They are a product of a mind filled with negative states of mind, negative emotions, disturbing emotions. Anger, for instance. Anybody here happy when they're angry? Resentment, when you call to mind again and again some small harm that someone's done. Who suffers first when you're resentful? Attachment. Attachment, I think attachment is one of the sneakiest afflictions that we have to work with, because we can't always see it. Sure, very strong attachment, we can see that, but there are many, many levels and layers of attachment that we are yet to discover, I think. And then jealousy, pride, anxiety, worry, fear, things like that. So when the mind is negative, if we call it negative, or the mind is controlled by a negative state, then our actions are going to be distorted. They're going to be negative as well, and negative results right away. Makes so much sense, doesn't it? So logical. And yet, what happens throughout the day when something doesn't go our way? Yeah, it's an inconvenient truth, isn't it? So hopefully you can begin to see how happiness and suffering or dissatisfaction originate within our mind. And so the things and the people and the conditions that seem to help or harm, these are merely conditions for that internal experience. Therefore, if we can influence how we use our mind, how we cultivate our mind, how we steer our mind, if we can control what we're giving our attention to, then we have a chance of influencing our experiences of greater happiness and less suffering. And the mind's not fixed. That's good news. The mind is not permanent. It's not fixed. We may think that there's some aspect to ourselves that is enduring, permanent, non-changing, but find it. I challenge you to find that aspect of yourself. The mind and the body both, the basis for what we label I, all of those things are changing moment to moment. So we can take advantage of that. And it's possible, because of that fact, that the mind is impermanent, it's constantly changing, and also the fact that afflictions are erroneous. They have a mistaken aspect to them, so they can be undermined, they can be countered, they can be rendered incapable of doing their dirty work by applying an antidote. So we can undermine the afflictions, we can cultivate and increase the positive states of mind, limitlessly, actually. And there's logic to prove that, so we'll look at that. So more and more in this modern world, it seems that we're surrounded by an unavoidable gravitational field of sense pleasures, external sense pleasures pulling at our attention, especially with the internet, right? You can't even look at the news without getting 5 ads, about new shoes and this thing you can't live without. And so we're constantly bombarded by appearances of sense pleasures. And how skilled are we at discerning whether we actually need something or not? Or how quickly are we pulled in? And it's interesting how all of these things seem to promise some enduring, lasting happiness, despite how transient and fleeting they actually are. So without investigating this thoroughly, we will be fooled by these appearances. We're fooled by the way our own mind has been habituated. Not like we've got a ring in our nose, we're just being pulled. And I don't know about you, but I'm a slow learner. How many times have you, as an example, how many times have you overeaten thinking that there was happiness in just a few more potato chips or one more piece of Shane's pizza? Those of you who haven't had Shane's pizza, you have to come back because it's pretty good. But how many of you in this room have eaten one piece too many and then experienced the result of that? Or, one more piece of chocolate cake or one more glass of wine. I just need one more little glass of wine and then I'll be okay. We're slow learners, we keep chasing after the same things, hoping for a different result, and we don't get a different result. So unlike anger, attachment is often difficult to detect, I find. That's why we're going to be in silence just for today and tomorrow, so that we have a chance, more of a chance to hear what we're saying to ourselves. What a concept, right? Even 5 minutes of breathing meditation. Did you notice how many thoughts are bubbling up? And what are those thoughts saying? And where do they come from? And where do they go? Those are interesting questions that we need to investigate. Who's thinking? Who's thinking those thoughts? Where are they coming from? So attachment is even more difficult to find fault with because we think attachment is the means to our happiness. This is a common misunderstanding, misconception in our culture. So we need to ask, does attachment ever lead to real satisfaction, the satisfaction that we're longing for, so that we can just go, I've arrived. I don't need anything else. I'm complete now. As Lama Zopa says, if you check, there's always something missing. It always feels like something missing. Even when we get our object of attachment, how long until we're aware, but I can have one more thing, one more thing, then I'd be happy. So when we investigate, we find that the satisfaction from sense objects in particular, that's a big illusion that we're mesmerized by all the time. So every Monday after lunch, we recite this text called The 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas by Tagme Sangpo. And there are a couple of verses there that are quite telling. Verse 21 says, sensual pleasures are like salt water. The more you indulge, the more thirst increases. Abandon at once those things which bring clinging attachment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. And there's another verse, number 9, that says, like dew on the tip of a blade of grass, pleasures of the three worlds last only a while and then vanish. Aspire to the never-changing supreme state of liberation. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So a lot of our frustration comes from trying to hold on to things and experience that are impermanent and fleeting in nature. And that often leaves us feeling quite dissatisfied. We may not recognize that connection yet. But the fact that they don't last, that leads to dissatisfaction. Not to mention exhaustion. And instead we just, chase the next shiny thing. However, some conscious intention, which we'll begin that this weekend, some conscious focused attention to the ongoing, continuous, momentary nature of things and people and ideas, concepts. Those same objects have a lot to teach us about the nature of impermanence, the actual impermanent nature of all conditioned phenomena, all the things that we're coming in contact with. They're all changing moment to moment. We don't see that. We can see gross changes, but we can't see the subtle. Everything is subtly moving. Everything's, made of atoms. We know this from scientific explanations. So they have a lot to teach us about the actual impermanent nature, and we'll see as we meditate on impermanence that this is one of the main antidotes to attachment. So we'll work with that this weekend. So learning to live and act from an understanding, a deeper personal experience of impermanence is a discovery that can really enrich our lives and change our lives a lot. It reduces a lot of unrealistic expectations that we may or may not know we have about ourselves, about others, about the things that we're experiencing. So it may be obvious how attachment to things like alcohol or money or gambling or sex or power lead to problems rather than to happiness. But we may wonder, well, what's wrong with attachment to people? My life would be very dull if I wasn't attached to the people I love, right? My partner, my family, my children, my parents, my siblings, my friends. So we're going to investigate the difference between attachment and real love. Those are two very different states of mind. So the good news is we can lessen the attachment, the clinging, craving, unsatisfied attachment that's there, that often leads to anger. Have you noticed? Have you made that connection? And we can increase the actual genuine love and care for another person and their happiness. Those are two very different states of mind. So there are many things that we can be attached to, aren't there? So I thought it might be helpful just to spend a few minutes brainstorming some of the things that we're most attached to. We'll get more specific later, but just in general, and just throw them out, just put them out there. What are you attached to? Why are you here this weekend? Your son's happiness. How kind of you to be concerned about your son's happiness and to be attached to it. Yeah. Oh, okay. You have 3 sons. And they all have lots of moods, and you're really attached to them being happy. So you'll be happy, right? Okay. What else? Pets. Yes, especially cats. Some people are dog people, some people are cat people. What else? Good health. Oh, yeah. I can appreciate that, especially as we get older. Sleep. Yeah. Your phone, of course. Thank you for being honest. You're attached to your phone, and we put it in a box and locked it up. So I bet you're suffering right now. What else? Praise. Yes. Praise. Yeah. Bring it on. And money. Yeah, it seems like that's going to solve all the problems, isn't it? We're attached to money. We do need a certain amount of money to get by in this world, for sure. But do we need as much? I mean, do you know anyone who has enough money? Probably not. Although, actually, we found someone who thought he had enough money, and he's now donating a lot of his money. There are more and more people like that. Like, I can't remember her name, but Jeff Bezos' wife is donating millions of dollars of her inheritance from the divorce. She's probably keeping millions too. Okay. Well, it's hers. No problem. You're attached to your house. You have a very nice house. Some of us have stayed in your house, so understandable. But you're attached to it, so probably there's some exaggeration of how good that house is. Yeah. What it gives you. How it makes you feel. Yeah, you're safe there. It's a beautiful neighborhood, too. Yeah, and yeah, what a setup. If something happens at that house, could be difficult. Yeah, so let's look. Okay, we've got some microphones, so if we can pass those around, that'll be helpful for the people online because we want to include them, and they probably have some things they want to add too.
I realized in doing the Lam Rim attachment meditation on Shambhala with vulnerable children that, well, actually, I have bad moods in my house too.
How can that be when you have such a perfect house?
There's something to look into.
What else? Travel. Yeah, exciting travel, not boring travel. You're attached to acceptance. You want people to accept you. Yeah, someone was mentioning the other day that we're often attached to being seen and heard. That's kind of connected. And being accepted for who we are. What else? Come on, everyone here should have at least your reputation. Thank you for being honest about that. Yes. Your personal time. Oh, we can all commiserate with you. Personal space, personal time. Yeah. What else? You're attached to you. Good for you. That's honest. Yeah. Anybody not attached to me or, you're me? Yeah. That's like the fundamental attachment, isn't it? Yeah. Being comfortable, of course. We are attached to being comfortable. Notice that this weekend as you shift around sitting on your cushion. Can you actually get comfortable? That's often the first instruction you get when you're meditating. Make yourself comfortable. As if you could. How long does that last? And notice the thoughts. Oh, if I just move my leg a little, I'll be more comfortable. For how long? Yeah. Okay. What else? Tea. Is it the tea or is it the caffeine, Venerable? Okay, both. Yeah. Yeah, Francesca. Your views. Yeah, your opinions, views, points of view. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on around lately. What else? Can you be attached to the Dharma? We're going to find, we'll look into this, but can you be attached to the Dharma? That's a good question. We need to investigate that. Yeah.
Acknowledgement or praise.
Acknowledgement and praise. Yep. Being seen, being heard, being accepted, yep, praised.
My husband's devotion, being there for me.
Yes. Your husband's devotion for being there for you. You bet. Lots of expectation there. Honey, you better live up to what you've promised. Impossible. Because it's always changing, isn't it? What you want one day is not what you want the next day. And so he's supposed to know that. He's supposed to be a mind reader and clairvoyant and yeah. Can you think of anything you're not attached to? Pain. Anything that causes suffering, huh? Actually, we have craving to be separated from those things. So we do have some attachment to those things. Yeah. Okay.
That's the microphone.
If you have certain states of guilt, you can be attached to your suffering, to your punishment.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, isn't it? We're attached to a certain view of ourselves, and the any change to that could be threatening. Identities, we're attached to identities, and we all have a lot of identities, don't we? Different identities at different times. We were talking about this the other day. It was Venerable Losong who was saying we're attached to being a man and being a woman. We're attached to being whatever country we come from, whatever. Yeah, I mean, we just go on and on. That list is a very long one, what we identify with. Yeah. Okay, so that gets us started, at least. No one said, oh, you said comfort, but no one said pleasant feelings. Aren't we? It's kind of along the lines of comfort. Yeah, same. We're attached to pleasant feelings. So sometimes it's interesting to see, am I really attached to this object, or am I more attached to the feeling it gives me? You know, they often say that people may not remember what you said to them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. Well, I mean, you didn't make them feel, but how they felt in response to what you said or did with them. Yeah. Okay, so pleasant feelings underlie a lot of our attachment to other things. Are we really craving a feeling of pleasure? Is that really what's there? Or are we looking for maybe a dopamine rush? Boy, that's interesting when we think about all the research that's been done about how the internet works and how algorithms work and how we're being hooked constantly because we get these little bits of dopamine rush from getting a click or a like or all those things that happen on the internet, social media in particular. And as Shane mentioned, we're attached to ourselves, our sense of self. Of course, that's the deepest attachment that conditions our life, clinging to the concept of self, clinging to the self. You know, based on self-grasping ignorance, that's like the root affliction, the misunderstanding of how we exist, then we have attachment for that self. That's self-centeredness. And so from a Mahayana point of view, I mean, that's one way of describing it. We have this attachment to self. It's not actually an affliction, but it seems to operate like an attachment. That self-centeredness is a real hindrance to our development of altruism and bodhicitta. So it's something that we need to address. And then based on attachment to the self, did anyone say the body? They're attached to their body? Health, we are attached to our health. That's one aspect of our body. Did you say that? She said it, okay. You'd rather have a different body, but but if we really came, you know, if push came to shove and someone said, here, take this body, you might think, well, wait a minute, maybe this body's not so bad. Yeah. You know, we're attached to our body, to our looks that are connected with our, nobody said that. We're attached to our looks. Come on, be honest. Okay, you put your hand up. And was there anything else online that didn't get mentioned? Pretty much what we'd already covered. Okay. All right. So, I love the way Venerable Children has really hit the nail on the head with this one. Our culture so much values youth and beauty, and yet every one of us are getting older and uglier in every minute. That's sobering. I love that line. And I was visiting my sister last fall, and I don't know, somehow it came up. A friend had come to visit, and she was complimenting her, and it came out of my mouth without thinking. Sometimes I can put my foot in my mouth. That'll probably happen this weekend. And I said, yeah, we're all just getting older and uglier. And they looked at me with horror, like, it was stunning. And one of them muttered, are you serious? But think about how much money we spend trying to avoid that. Yeah, keep our looks a certain way. Yeah, so we're going to look into that a little bit. Okay, so let me tell you, what inspired this topic for me is that of the three poisons, attachment, anger, and ignorance, it seems that anger has gotten more airtime than any of the others. Don't you feel like you know a lot more about anger than the other two? Why is that? Manifesting more? Or maybe because it's just more uncomfortable. We don't often, unless we're longing for something that we don't have, we're probably not so aware that attachment is even present. But with anger, it gets our attention right away. So, and there are many good books out there about anger. Venerable Children has a beautiful one called Working with Anger. I've tried to get her to write a companion book, Working with Attachment, and she said, why don't you write it? Actually, I'd love to hear a weekend of Venerable Children teaching on attachment, and maybe we can arrange that sometime in the future, because, yeah, she's an amazing teacher. So anyway, there are these books. There's Healing Anger with His Holiness. That's another very good book. And Thich Nhat Hanh has a good book on anger. It's called Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. That's also a beautiful book. Really get you to think in a different way. And there are also a lot of good books about ignorance out there. And it's Antidote, Wisdom Realizing Emptiness. There's a beautiful book in our bookstore called Insight into Emptiness. Venerable Children edited that book for Geshe Jampa Tegchok. And it's gorgeous. You can just read that book again and again, spelling out how it is that, what are the foundational pieces of knowledge we need to have to move towards realizing emptiness, encountering ignorance. Also, how to see yourself as you really are by His Holiness. We've studied that here. And Jeffrey Hopkins' classic Meditation on Emptiness. Those are beautiful books about ignorance and emptiness, wisdom, realizing emptiness. So here we are working on our anger, working on our ignorance. Meanwhile, attachment is in the background like a virus, pilfering off our happiness and diluting our happiness and bringing dissatisfaction into our lives, and we're not even paying attention to it. Not really. And increasing our discontent. But when I searched on Amazon for any book that had attachment in the title, mostly I found a lot of psychological books on attachment theory, attachment styles, trauma and attachment. Those are from a psychological point of view. And those are very interesting books. I've read a little bit, not a lot, but that's not what we're talking about here this weekend. There is, that's not how we're using the word attachment. So that attachment we might call healthy attachment, the kind of attachment that an infant, a young child needs to establish with their parent, their caregiver, so that they can have a healthy sense of self as they develop through their lives. And we need that. And if you feel like you don't have that, these are the books you might need to look into. And that's okay. We have to use whatever tools we can find to get us prepared and healthy enough to work with the Dharma. I only found one Buddhist book that was dedicated completely to attachment, and that's Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Practice the Dharma. Beautiful book. It's all about the 8 worldly concerns. We're attached to praise, averse to criticism. We're attached to gain, averse to losing things. We're attached to praise, averse to, I said that. we're attached to sense pleasure, averse to unpleasant feelings, unpleasant sense pleasures. That didn't make sense. Unpleasant feelings. And what's the last one? Reputation. We're attached to a good reputation and averse to a bad one. So that's a very good book. There's so much good information in that book. But don't you find that interesting? That it's one of the 3 main poisons, and there's no books about it. And then as I was preparing this weekend, I understood why there were no books about it. It's a big topic. There's a lot to explore about it. So, and also to think about how attachment is the affliction that is primarily responsible for keeping us circling in samsara. Those of you who've done a little more study and looked into the middle scope, and especially the 12 links, and you understand how craving is what, at the end of our life, stimulates one karmic seed to propel us into the next rebirth. That's how it's described from a Buddhist point of view. It happens with craving. If there's no craving, we don't take a rebirth based on affliction. At that point, maybe there's choice. There would be choice rather than being propelled uncontrollably. So I think that's very interesting. And I also think it's very interesting, especially since anger arises primarily when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So why are we always looking at anger and not looking at what's underlying it? That doesn't make sense to me. So here we are, starting to look at attachment. And I'll be very honest with you, although I've done honest battle with attachment over the years, I am by no means any expert. Well, I am an expert on attachment. I'm still creating a lot of it. In that regard, I am an expert. But I'm not an expert in countering attachment or developing non-attachment. But as I said, I have done honest battle with it over the years, and it's still a force that I reckon with. So hopefully I have a few things to share with you. As it turned out, Venerable Chodron is just back from Taiwan. She's been back a week now, so she still is dealing with jet lag, although you'd never know it seeing her teach last night. And our other main teacher, Venerable Sangye Kadro, is off teaching in Spain. And so because of that situation, then I was nominated to sit up here this weekend. And any of the seniors could be doing this weekend as easily as I, but somehow a karmic seed ripened for me. And so that's what brings me here today. I also know that whenever I prepare something, I learn so much more about it. And that was another motivating factor to look into getting honest with attachment, because I want to know a lot more about this affliction. Over the winter, we spent a lot of our time meditating on the Four Noble Truths. And so the first truth is true suffering, the unsatisfactory conditions we find ourselves in. But the second truth, true origin of suffering, really comes down to the afflictions. And particularly, it comes down to craving. When you look at the 4 aspects of true origin, it's talking about craving. So, which is a derivative of attachment. So what I would suggest is that we explore this topic together. Let's think about this like a workshop. We're gonna work this together, and I would like it to be very experiential. So you must participate. I insist. I'm attached to that. Okay. And I would like to reassure all of you that no one is going to ask you to give up your attachment this weekend. It's not going to happen. We're not going to ask you to do that. And so you can relax. It's your responsibility whether you give up attachment or not. That's on you. And no one is going to shame you for having attachment, hopefully. We all have attachment, just like we all have anger. We all have ignorance. We all have jealousy and pride, just different degrees of it at different times, depending on the circumstances. So we can just relax into that fact and let it be okay. We're not bad people because we have attachment. We're just human. We all have it. And we're deeply habituated to it, unfortunately. I think you might be surprised what you discover this weekend. Okay, so if you put up the second slide, this is what I have in mind for this weekend. So first of all, let's get really clear about what attachment is in all its permutations, or at least in some of its permutations, and also what it's not, because we might have some misunderstandings about, what it is. So we're going to identify attachment. Hopefully, we'll learn to identify attachment in our own experience. That's so important, otherwise we won't catch it. And so this is a big part of our inner work, is to be able to identify in our own body, our own mind, when attachment is arising, so that we can begin to antidote it. And in the next 2 days, we'll examine some different kinds of attachment, because they manifest differently and they require different antidotes, I've found. So we can't just have blanket antidotes for attachment, although impermanence probably fits the bill, as does wisdom realizing emptiness. But other things we might use to antidote them will be very specific to the kind of attachment that we have. So that's the first thing. And then let's try to understand how attachment is generated in our mind. What is the sequence that brings that about? I think the more information we have about how our mind works, the more chance we have of catching any of the afflictions. And then let's look into attachment's faulty and destructive nature, its disadvantages, recognizing those shortcomings and some of the results that there could be from indulging in attachment, so that we can make more informed and conscious decisions as we go through our life. And then let's acquaint ourselves with a variety of antidotes that we're likely to use in our daily life, not just good theory that reads well on a piece of paper, but something that we can actually use and put in our pocket and take with us to keep attachment in check, and really beginning to develop some confidence that we can get the upper hand on the attachment in our lives. A couple of weeks ago, I was rolling mantras with some guests, and we were talking. I was asking them, what are you attached to? Because I was really curious. What is it that you're attached to? And one person said, I'm attached to everything, and so here we are. So we won't necessarily go through this in this neat, tidy order. It'll sort of be a mixture of things, but I intend to cover all of this. Okay, so next slide, please. I imagine that most of you have come across this saying at one time or another. It's, okay, so I'll read it. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, for they become your destiny. What's so interesting is that this has been attributed to everyone from Lao Tzu to Buddha Shakyamuni, to Ralph Waldo Emerson, and even Margaret Thatcher's father. I guess she mentioned it in some parliamentary thing, and it was attributed to him. But actually, what I found in looking in one of those online quote busters, quote investigators, is that actually this first showed up in, it was first published in a Colchester, England newspaper in 1856. It was written by a teacher to some of his students, and he was trying to give them some good advice. And so, however trite it may seem, we've all seen it before, but I think it's so true, don't you? Whatever's happening in our mind, that's going to influence who we become. And sometimes our behavior is so habitual that we hardly notice it anymore. Like, for instance, doing that little bit of breathing meditation. Isn't it surprising how many thoughts are there? And mostly they're there, why? Because of habit. We've thought that way a number of times. And so there's a momentum, there's a, can we use the word inertia? I think that can use both ways. Yeah, it's like a default mechanism that happens. So it's almost as if we feel habitually, we think habitually, we act habitually. And so what we're trying to do is raise our awareness so that we can act more consciously, more intentionally, more deliberately. Often our thoughts and feelings and physical sensations are so entwined, intermeshed, that it's hard to identify which one triggered the other, isn't it? And when we're in the midst of that habitual kind of storm, mental storm, often it results in pain for ourselves and others when we're just uncontrollably going in a certain direction. So we want to gain some control. In fact, one of the things that makes our life so unsatisfactory is that we don't have as much control as we think we do. Yeah, so we'll look into that. But by repeatedly thinking and feeling in certain ways, we reinforce those patterns in our mind. That's important to pay attention to. What are we thinking? And how does that reinforce what's happening? This can lead us to believe that we have no choice about the way we think and feel and behave. But that is simply not true. Two things are true. We are constantly changing, and we are deeply habituated. Both things happen at the same time. So it may feel like we have no choice, but we can begin working with that habituation and begin undermining it. So from a Buddhist perspective, we make use of the fact that our mind, and therefore our behavior and our personality, are not fixed, not predestined, not permanent. Because the reality is that we're all made up of a combination of both positive aspects and negative aspects, or aspects that aren't so positive, ones that we're not so enamored with, not so proud of. So we can, like the scales of a balance, we can start to cultivate the more positive aspects and see what that does in our life. And we can start counteracting and reducing and eliminating the negative aspects of ourselves. That's called Dharma practice. So what will determine our thoughts, our words, our actions, habits, and character tomorrow, the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, the next decade, and the next life is what we choose to focus on today. This is empowering. Take that on. Again, a lot of what I will be saying this weekend is not rocket science. It's pretty common sense. Well, it's not so common, but it's sensical. It needs to become more common. Yeah, so anyway. And let me just pause here to say, if at any time I'm using any Buddhist jargon that you don't understand, just put your hand up. If I use words you don't know, just put your hand up, because that can be hindering if we're saying something you don't understand. If we think about it from our Western point of view, our Western way of thinking, we usually think that negative states of mind are the ones that make us feel bad, and the positive ones are the ones that make us feel good. So it really has to do a lot with feeling, and probably, yeah, it has a lot to do with, we emphasize how we feel. From the Buddhist worldview, though, negative states of minds are the ones that perpetuate cyclic existence. That's a whole different perspective, isn't it? That's a much larger perspective. Not just about here, right now, my pleasure, right here and now, but this whole thing we call cyclic existence. And positive states of mind are the ones that eventually lead us to our spiritual goals. From a Buddhist point of view, that's liberation and full awakening, freedom from cyclic existence. So our mind being impermanent and constantly changing, we're going to take advantage of that reality to lessen the afflictions, to increase the positive, virtuous states of mind. And to the degree that we can do that, then our words, our actions, our habits, our character will change in a more beneficial and rewarding way. That's the theory anyway. And it takes a strong intention on our part, doesn't it? And a lot of effort, not without effort, to bring that about. We'll see, maybe we'll see as we work with attachment this weekend, how humbling it can be. Venerable was giving a plug for humility last night, how humbling it can be. And it reminds me of a story that Venerable Chuni has actually told a number of times. There was a period of her life where she was working diligently with attachment, and she went to a teaching with Venerable Rabina. Some of you know Venerable Rabina. She's a real firehouse. Venerable, I think, as I understood it, Venerable Chuni was lamenting that she was working on her attachment and wasn't getting anywhere, it wasn't going anywhere, it was kind of stuck. Is that right, Venerable? Yep, okay. And Rabina said to her, "Have some humility." It was quite an admonishment, as I understood it. Have some humility. You know, think about how many moments of just this life, of just this week, we've had attachment. And think about in this one lifetime alone, how many moments we've had, how much enculturation, habituation, deepening, familiarity we've generated with attachment. So it's not going to roll over and play dead just because we come to a 2-day teaching. This is a lifelong work, lifetimes of work. Did you want to add something?
I just want to say and repeat this for the.
Can you take a mic?
Oh, it was. Very.
Yes. Okay, I can say that. So although the admonishment from Venerable Rabina was very stern, it was also given with a lot of love and compassion. Yeah, and real care, you know. So please hear it that way. All right. So with the remainder of this session, let's just look at attachment, why it's considered an affliction, and how it's defined from a Buddhist point of view. That may be all we have time for. And then we're going to start looking at some of the things, the material things that we're attached to. So if you don't have paper or a computer you can put this in, we'll have some paper and pen that we can pass out. And it's passed out. Okay, good. All right, so let's look quickly. I think there's the next slide. Yeah, attachment as an affliction. So in Buddhism, afflictions are defined as an inner mental event whose nature is to disturb or unsettle the mind. It contributes to our mind being restless, not peaceful or tranquil. Okay, so this is a general characteristic of every affliction, whether it's a root affliction or a secondary derivative affliction. And afflictions always create some kind of problem. It disturbs our mental peace and calmness and leads to some kind of unwanted result. So it's more obvious when anger or jealousy or resentment are in our mind. They're immediately disturbing. We can see that, we can recognize that. But do you think of attachment as afflicting or disturbing your mind? Maybe when it's really strong, right? But what about just an average day when you're just going about your day, getting your cup of tea just the way you like it, or those sorts of things? That's normal. That's not attachment, that's just normal. We don't identify that as afflicting our mind until, you know, the moment that there's not enough honey left or whatever it is you're attached to. So we can think about this in terms of a couple of things. When we don't yet have the object that we're attached to, you know, that's one situation. It can sometimes have a zingy quality, can't it? Like a sense of excitement, like we're going to get something, like a promise. And that's the attachment that we equate with happiness, you know, because we're going to get something. Yeah, get something pleasurable. You know, for example, if we're getting ready to go on a vacation, we get quite excited, or we're going to a concert or going to the mall to get shoes, or what do we get excited about? We're going to the woods. Flex day. We get excited about our flex day when we have some time off. So in general, we equate this excitement with happiness, and we don't yet recognize the disturbance that it brings to our mind. So this excitement is very different from feeling peaceful, settled, content, at ease. You know, if we get the thing, we're okay. If we don't get the thing, we're okay. It's very different than that, isn't it? It's got this zingy, energetic quality to it. And we spend a lot of money on medicines and therapies to calm that down, actually. I had an experience many years, decades ago, actually, where I was indulging in some attachment until I recognized, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. It was such a revelation. It was such a revelation that I just put it down right then and there. It's like, okay, I see it for what it is. I can drop this. And then once we have our object of attachment, sure, we can experience some sense pleasure from having it, no problem. sense pleasure is a type of happiness, but attachment can easily lead then to fear. Oh no, as soon as I have something I like, I'm going to lose it. What if someone takes it from me? What if it, ends, or, it's going to rob my joy if I don't have this thing? So then that starts to undermine, and make our mind a little shaky. And attachment can lead to other afflictions like possessiveness or jealousy or even miserliness, not wanting to share the things that we have because they're all mine. I want to keep them for myself. And then, as we'll see, attachment sets us up for disappointment because there's a contradiction between the object and our projection of the object. Actually, we're attached to our projection that we've overlaid on the object. We're not actually able to see the real object itself. So this is an important aspect to keep in mind and to begin to separate those two things. And then when we finally separate, or eventually separate as we will, from our object of attachment, then, because all meeting ends in parting, right? That can lead to feelings of sadness and loss and grief and despair. Or, for some people, it might lead to more anger. So when we look into things more deeply like this, then we can begin to appreciate how even subtle levels of attachment disturb our mind, make our mind unsettled. Okay, so that's just a little bit about afflictions in general, and let's look at attachment more specifically. So we could say in general, we could define attachment in general as an attitude that overestimates the qualities of an object or a person or an idea or situation, and then clings to it, has this clinging quality to it. We don't want to be separated from it. So that's a general definition. But if we look into the Abhidharma text, they give us more full definitions that really can provide a lot of information about what's happening in our mind and how attachment gets set up. So let me read this to you and see how it lands for you. Attachment is a mental factor that, based on distorted attention, exaggerates the attractiveness of a polluted object, wishes for and takes a strong interest in it. That's from volume 3 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, Samsara Nirvana Buddha Nature. So let's just look at this quickly. Attachment is a mental factor. What's interesting is that if we think about, see if you can visualize this, a consciousness as a label is like the big category that includes everything about the mind. And then on one hand, you have what we call main minds or primary minds, like our primary visual consciousness. That's how we see shapes and forms. Primary auditory consciousness, olfactory consciousness, gustatory consciousness, and tactile consciousness. In addition, we have a primary mental consciousness. That's on one side. And those consciousness just engage with an object kind of in a bare way. They just know the bare entity of the object. But what makes it so that we like some things, don't like other things? We have opinions about things, not other things. That comes from this other side of the equation, which are mental factors. Don't be put off by the term. You'll recognize them. There are positive mental factors, or we could say virtuous mental factors, like love and compassion, concentration. Not sure that's, yep. Anyway, faith, generosity, things like that. Then there are afflicted mental factors. Afflictions. They can be either non-virtuous or they can even be neutral. But they're the ones that have some kind of distortion to them. And so there's a whole category of those, like anger, attachment, ignorance, jealousy, pride, etc. And then there are neutral mental factors. So what's interesting is that these 5 sense consciousnesses don't engage with attachment directly. It's the mental consciousness, the primary mental consciousness, that is influenced by these other mental factors, and it comes right on the heels. First, we see something. We can just see the bare object. We have a split second or split nanosecond of a pure object, and then our thoughts jump in. And our thoughts are the ones, our conceptual consciousnesses are the ones that are influencing exaggerations, distortions, things like that. or from a positive point of view, bringing a more clear understanding of the object itself, like loving compassion or loving kindness or compassion. So it's a mental factor. It's in this category. It's not a main mind. It's a mental factor. It's based on distorted attention that exaggerates the attractiveness of the object. So right there we can see there's distortion, right? And the main distortions that we can look at are we tend to see impermanent things as permanent. That's just part of attachment. We don't recognize that there's this appearance of permanence, and we're assenting to that appearance, like it's going to last forever, or that this object is going to always be pleasurable, not recognizing it has a suffering nature to it, and that it's pure just from its own side, and that it's self-existent, doesn't depend on anything else. So right away we see that there's this distortion from another mental factor called inappropriate attention. Isn't that descriptive? We have inappropriate attention to some aspect of the object. And then that's what exaggerates and leads to these distortions and following the distortions. And then it takes a strong interest in it. We adhere to the object. This is a distinction with attachment, is that it's like our mind kind of sinks into the object in a way that it's difficult to extract ourselves. The classic example is like oil in a cloth. Oil soaks into a cloth. That's very different than anger, isn't it? Anger is more volatile, it's immediate, but attachment kind of sneaks up on you and slowly sinks in, usually. I mean, there are lots of variations here. And then it wishes to possess it. So if we don't already possess the object, we desire it, we pursue it, we long for it. And if we already possess the object, then we tend to cling to it. We don't want to be separated from it. We get possessive of it. So does that fill out a little bit more? We'll continue unpacking this definition as we go along to really have more of a clear understanding of all the different facets of this mental factor we call attachment. Okay. Does this description kind of match your experience? Does it resonate with you a little bit? Okay. All right, so I'd like you to pull out your piece of paper. Like I said, I'd like to make this course more experiential. So let's spend a little bit of time now looking at the things, the material things that we're attached to. We'll look at attachment to ourselves and other people and other things later. But for now, let's just start making a list of material things that you feel attached to. And we'll take about 6 or 8 minutes to do this exercise. Now, this will probably take longer for our lay guests than our monastics. I don't know. See what your experience is. What? Socks. Okay, put socks on her. She's attached to her socks, especially those long ones. Okay. So just take a few minutes to write down things you feel attached to, you have a strong liking for, things that you don't want to be separated from, whatever you notice a sense of clinging to, whatever things you assign happiness to. It helps so much if you write it down or put it in your iPad and have a physical list. If you get stuck, you can just kind of mentally walk through your house or your apartment and imagine all the things there and imagine giving them away. What things can you easily give away? What things would be more difficult? You'd have some resistance to. And don't forget to include the things that you've assigned sentimental value to. And don't worry, your list won't be seen by anyone else, so you can be 100% honest. be sure to think about clothing and shoes and devices. Don't forget your devices. Think about your books. And I hope the people at home are doing this exercise as well. It really is helpful to write things down. Right now, we're just looking at material things, yeah. I thought that was probably the easier category to start with. Okay, a number of people are still writing, but you can continue working on this list during the break. We'll have a half-hour break now before meditation. I'm just curious, was anything surprising on your list? Anything come up that was surprising? Is your list shorter or longer than you thought it would be? Yeah, can you? Cappy, you got the microphone. Thank you.
Well, I thought there was only going to be about 5 or 6 things at first, and then it just started pouring out of me. You know, as I started thinking about, oh, I do like antiques, yeah, and, you know, I mean, my number one was my grandkids, who I actually thought maybe I shouldn't take such a long vacation because I'll miss my grandkids. So that's not a bad thing, but, you know, but I'm just surprised that it's pouring out of me now that we started.
Actually, that success, Kathy, because, you know, we can't address things until we're aware of them. So that's really successful to begin seeing more and more. And you can keep this piece of paper with you and continue building on it. Sarah, did you have something? Okay. Anything else? Yes, right behind you.
I was surprised to see that I have many caveats for the things I'm attached to. Like, I love snow, but when I'm not plowing or shoveling, when I'm not cold, and when it's fresh and clean.
So you have conditional attachment.
Conditions.
That's probably true about a lot of things. Yeah. Anything else? Yes. Kathy.
For me, a lot of it is almost categorical. It's like I started naming some foods and then I'm like, okay, there's just a lot of food I'm attached to. Or, you know, a lot of things about being warm, you know, well, this piece of clothing keeps me warm and that piece of clothing keeps me warm, of course, in a very specific way. But yeah, so it seems like there's just a couple of categories that most of my attachments fall under.
Interesting. Did anyone else find that? You? Okay. Yes. In the back. We want to share all these good comments with our friends online, so that's why we use the microphone.
Hi. Similar to the snow comment, which is very interesting, but thinking a lot about over this talk is the idea of good and bad. Like you want like I love a beautiful car, for example. Let's say a very expensive car, for many reasons, freedom, you know, looks, reputation, all that sort of thing. But the downside is the cost, the fear, the worry, the insurance, the gas, everything that's negative. So there's sort of this priorities of, you know, this overcomes all the negative, or the negative overcomes the positive.
That's a great thing to recognize, because actually, often when we're attached to things, we can't even see the negative aspects of the object. So you've been working on this a while. Thank you. Yes, one more, and then we'll dedicate.
This one time, I think, yeah, last summer, I bought an espresso machine, and this girl was like, yeah, I have one. I was like, I need it. Like that same night I bought it, picked it up, I got home, whatever, and I was gutted because I had no idea how to use it. And then I was so mad, I was like, I'm gonna take it back. Like, I was just so upset. I was like, oh.
Did you take it back? And can I ask, how much have you actually used it? Oh, okay. Okay. Because often what happens with objects of attachment is we buy them and then we don't use them. We put them in a closet. How many of you have full closets at home with things that you probably haven't used in a long time? Yeah, a few of us. Okay. So let's dedicate. We'll have a half-hour break. Oh, I don't want to take your job. Okay, we'll dedicate.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forever.